You are now listening to the Final Whistle Sports Podcast. Here is your host, Blaine Spencer.
What's going on, everyone? Welcome into another edition of the Final Whistle Sports Podcast. You know who I am. I am your host, Blaine Spencer. We are moving through our divisional breakdowns. If you guys haven't yet, please go watch or listen to the NFC North that took place a couple weeks ago, as well as the NFC South. This week, we are talking the NFC West, and who wouldn't be the best guest to have on than my man Steezy A. Smith, who is pretty much everything Seattle Seahawks. He's been at training camp the last couple days. Steezy, how are you? Appreciate you coming on.
Hey, bro, I'm feeling great, feeling wonderful, feeling blessed, and it's been a while since we've done this, so thanks for having me on.
Absolutely. Looking forward to it. So remember, everyone, how we go through these divisional breakdowns, we go from last year's records, and then we go from top to bottom. So we'll start off with the defending, reigning Super Bowl champs, which is the Los Angeles Rams. As we remember, finished as the 4 seed and ended up getting their very own rival, Arizona Cardinals, and the rest was history, knocking out Tampa Bay, as well as so many top squads, even in the division. They beat the division twice this last postseason, taking out Arizona and San Francisco before winning in SoFi as the hosts. Steezy, what are the expectations for the Rams? It's got to be pretty much run it back, right? That's one of the two, I think personally, it's one of the top 2 teams in the NFC. What are your thoughts?
Not just in the NFC, but in the entire NFL. I mean, Blaine, I'm with you all the way. I think with the LA Rams, I know they lost to Von Miller, but you bring in my guy, Bobby Wagner. You bring in Allen Robinson, who they deem as an upgrade over Robert Woods. And you draft a Kyron Williams. I think he's a sleeper. Not a lot of people know about him, but I think he'll be a great pass catching back for this football team. I know there are the concerns with Matthew Stafford and his throwing arm. I spoke with the Rams reporter the other day, and he told me that this could linger into the regular season. And so, obviously, I'm not rooting for this team to have injuries, but as a Seahawks guy, it's like, okay, if the Rams are going to have a couple of, things to worry about on that end, then I'm not going to be mad about it, right? But all jokes aside, I think with the Rams, you're right, bro. I mean, it has to be run it back, Super Bowl or bust. I get that they're not going to have home field advantage in the Super Bowl again, but they probably won't need it. Barring health, this team should be one of the top 2, top 3 teams, not just in the NFC, but the entire NFL. They have the talent, they have the fire. And Coach Sean McVay is talking about how, they're hungry for another one. They could potentially still bring back an OBJ. So there's still a couple of moves to be made. But I'm real excited, not just for the Rams, but I know that's weird coming out of a Seahawks guy. But I'm just excited to watch because come week 1, I think they're actually one of the opening matchups. It's the Rams and the Bills, and I think that's a potential Super Bowl preview. But I think, the Rams, they have all this firepower, they have all this talent. I mean, everybody knows the deal. If they're not in contention for another Super Bowl, then I'd consider it a bust of a season.
I completely agree, and you're right. Opening night is Buffalo versus Rams. Many could argue that is a potential Super Bowl preview down the road already in week 1. It'll be a very interesting test. Mm-hmm. And the one thing about the Los Angeles Rams is that I think you'll agree with me on this, is that they're that handful of teams that are the most complete. Probably those 4 or 5 teams that you're like, if they're not minimum in the NFC or AFC championship, or let alone the Super Bowl, it is a failed year. You can make the argument for the Rams. I would put Tampa Bay in that conversation. Mm-hmm. You put Buffalo in that conversation. And then you can either put maybe even on the other side, it's the Chargers or the Chiefs, or even the Cincinnati Bengals, who was the AFC representative in the AF for the Super Bowl. So everything has fallen into place, right? We all thought that Aaron Donald, there was that lingering potential of him retiring, which would have he covers up a lot of gaps in a team when he's arguably the best defensive player in football. And many would even question that he's like outside the top 2. I would say he's top 2 minimum on the defensive, just in all of football. And then you have, again, like you said, Odell Beckham. Is he going to come back? It sounds like that they're going to probably try and work something out, and not try, because of the injury, they don't know what they're going to get. And I love the news about what you're reporting on the Rams with Matt Stafford.
Yeah.
Because I don't think many people realize that tendonitis in your arm for a football player is extremely rare. This is a very more, as I've done research on it, it's more of a baseball-like injury that requires that so coveted Tommy John surgery, which scares a lot of people, especially in the Rams. I don't think they're very concerned at the moment because he's been pretty much injured his entire career, and he's one of the Iron Man of football. During his career, he's rarely out. He's always playing hurt. But don't be surprised if they really ease him in and try and, if they have to give him a game or two off, especially if it's acting up, working through this schedule. Like, for example, like just looking ahead of me, like if everything doesn't go well and that week wouldn't match up against the Bills, you give them that extra week off because you have Atlanta in week 2 if you have to. There's games in their schedule where you can be like, you can mitigate the issues. Like week 6, Carolina, then they're on the bye after that. Maybe give, if again, still has some pain, you give him that week 6 game off, then you have the bye that gives him an extra couple weeks. I think there's opportunity for the Rams to really kind of slowly incorporate, especially depending on the reaction of Stafford's injury. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, and I mean, like we talked about, it's a Super Bowl or bust type of season. And so, like, as we saw last year, they were, like you mentioned, the number 4 seed. And so it's not necessarily like they need, to win as many games as possible. Oh, they need home field advantage. Oh, they need the number 1 seed. No. And so if they want to go the route that you laid out, then they could go that route. They could afford, they had the luxury to take that route. I mean, they have a solid, a qualified backup, I believe, in a John Wolford. And the offensive line is a potential concern of mine. I forgot to bring that up earlier, but outside of that, I mean, this team absolutely has it all. And so if they need to survive parts of the season without their starting star quarterback, then so be it.
Right. And I mean, other than like Tom Brady and the Patriots, this could be one of the few teams that have tried to go back to back, which is something that's completely unique. I think the expectations for them may be a little overwhelming now honestly, and that's incorrect. I think they're playing with house money now because last year was the year. It's at home, the Super Bowl, you're hosting. Tampa Bay just did it the year before, winning as they were the hosts. I think this year they're kind of just playing with, again, like how I said, playing with house money. They're trying to see what they're going to get. Again, they did lose Robert Woods to the trade into the Tennessee Titans, but again, like you mentioned, Allen Robinson, maybe a little bit more of an upgrade. I don't know how it's going to be interesting to see how they incorporate him, because how they utilize Robert Woods in the offense will be completely different how they're going to utilize Allen Robinson, which will be something that will be unique to see. But again, Sean McVay is one of the brightest minds in football. Everyone was questioning, could he get the monkey off his back? He answered those questions with flying colors. It'll be really intriguing to see how the Rams are going to move forward. I think they're easily going to be a double-digit win team, and be arguably the 1 or the 2 seed in the NFC.
No doubt. And I just wanted to add, and this is their words, like I mentioned, they deemed Allen Robinson as an upgrade. And I think they're very different players. I think Robert Woods is a more dominant run blocker, a more willing run blocker. He's more physical in that regard. But I think with Allen Robinson, I mean, he's just like that big body, right? Where you throw the ball up, more of a 50-50 possession type of receiver, definitely going to do more damage in the end zone. I don't think we're going to see Allen Robinson on those jet sweeps. We're not going to see him in motion like we do see a Robert Woods from time to time. But like I said, they bring different skill sets to the table. And I think this is going to be a place where he's going to be able to revitalize his career. I mean, what we saw last season in Chicago, that wasn't his best, with an Allen Robinson. Some might be questioning whether or not he's fallen, off a cliff. But I think in this offense, in this situation with the best quarterback he's ever had and in his career, he's definitely a guy I want in fantasy.
Absolutely. And you can make the argument that it's not Allen Robinson's fault. It's how bad the Chicago Bears have really utilized him in the offense. And especially with a rookie quarterback in Fields. And then I don't think Robinson ever saw eye to eye with Nagy in these last couple seasons with how they were utilizing him. So I think this is a huge opportunity for him as well, especially with Odell probably not going to play for those first couple weeks with the injury potentially. So I think that'd be something unique if they bring Odell back.
Right. And on that note, real quick, I just wanted to add, because we didn't talk about him, but Van Jefferson. And when I spoke with what's his name, Gilbert Manzano, the Rams reporter for a whole bunch of different newspapers in LA, he talked about how Van Jefferson might not be ready for week 1. And I brought up the possibility of the Rams signing an OBJ or bringing him back, but it's like OBJ is not going to be there come week 1.
Right.
And so I don't know if he's necessarily that replacement for Van Jefferson, but it is looking thin right now. I think they believe in the guys that they have. They drafted Tutu Atwell in the second round, but I think that's definitely a situation to monitor come the preseason, because if there's a veteran receiver out there, T.Y. Hilton's still a free agent. Maybe they bring him on board. I don't know. Who knows? They have a solid tight end core as well. So definitely interesting to see what happens in that wide receiver room.
Without question. And I do want to mention Tutu Atwell will be the guy probably using in the Robert Woods position for the offense.
Right.
How he was utilized in college at Louisville was very similar to how he could fit right into what the Rams are doing now.
Very versatile.
Absolutely. Let's jump now to the team that many people sometimes question where everything goes. So it seems like what can go wrong does go wrong, and that is the Arizona Cardinals. They finished second. They were arguably the best team in football for the first half of the year. Then, and again, in previous seasons, they get figured out and they fall off a cliff. That is accurate that they fall off the cliff. The results speak for themselves. Ended up losing in that wild card round to the Rams, and they got absolutely punished for it. It wasn't even a competitive game. The one thing that has been intriguing has been the whole Kyler Murray fiasco with his contract. That has been up in recent news. He deletes his social media. Cardinals kind of ghosted him. There was huge back and forth whether or not he was going to get the contract extension. Then they add a 4-hour minimum of studying into his contract, and that has blown up into his face since signing it. The agent shouldn't be his agent anymore if this was going to be a major issue. The Cardinals have now taken that part out of his contract. But now there are significant question marks because he has adamantly said that he doesn't really go into studying film. What do we expect from the Arizona Cardinals? This organization is absolute disarray. Cliff Kingsbury didn't even deserve the job in the first place. But that's a discussion for another day. Talk to me. What are the Cardinals going to look like?
Man, it's tough, bro. I look at this team defensively, and they lost to Chandler Jones. And I know J.J. Watt's still there. I know he's healthy, but he's only getting older. And outside of J.J. Watt, I like their linebacking core, but defensively or in the backfield, in the back end, in the secondary, they have a Budda Baker to hold things down. But I'm kind of worried about their corner situation. As we all know, DeAndre Hopkins is going to be serving a 6-game suspension. We heard about it, Marquise Hollywood Brown. I don't know if this is significant or serious, but I think he got charged? He wasn't arrested, but he got charged with some sort of speeding. So yeah, something along the lines of speeding. I don't know what happened there, but there's that to worry about. And so I don't really know where to go with this team. So defensively, I think they're going to take a step back. Offensively, they are going to be missing their best player. And so I think this really comes down to
for criminal speeding.
Okay, so he was arrested.
Right.
Okay, and so we don't know if he's going to be facing any sort of discipline from the NFL. But I don't know. I mean, like you talked about, bro, this team just seems to collapse every single year in the second half of seasons. And actually, I have a stat here, but Kingsbury is actually 17-44 in the closing halves of every season he's ever coached. So that includes 6 seasons at Texas Tech and 3 with the Cardinals. And like you alluded to, this team was arguably the best team in football last season after what? Was it 10 weeks or was it 7 weeks? They were 7-0 until that Thursday night football game.
I think they went through 10 weeks. I think they were like 8 or 9-1.
Okay, gotcha.
Green Bay through like week 10.
Right, and Green Bay didn't have any of their starting receivers. They didn't have any of their linemen.
Put Green Bay ahead of them and kind of was like that was their true test, and they faltered under the pressure.
Exactly. But I think with the Cardinals, a lot's gonna hinge on Kyler Murray's shoulders. Just because he's gonna have to carry a huge load with some of these guys that are going to be out. He's gonna have to make up for a defense that I think is going to take a step back, and that has a lot of question marks. We don't know about their center situation. Maybe there's been more clarification, but the last time I checked, he was mulling retirement, and I'm talking about Rodney Hudson. I like James Conner at running back, but he just has not been able to stay healthy consistently. They lost Chase Edmonds, his top backup. And so they do have a Darrell Williams who is definitely more than capable at running back in terms of backing him up. But I don't know. I mean, I wouldn't expect this team to make the playoffs, but I wouldn't expect this team to be one of the worst. I kind of just expect them to be more of a team that's middling, that's more in the middle tier of the NFC. But once D-Hop comes back, I mean, who knows? Maybe he comes back revitalized and he re-energizes this team. But if Kyler Murray's a true top 5, top 10 quarterback, then maybe he wills his team to the playoffs. But at this point, it's just really hard to really place any sort of expectations, just because we're used to seeing this team fall flat in the second half. They're going to be missing guys in the first half. We'll see what happens. I'm not really expecting a lot. I'd say somewhere along the lines of 8 wins, 9 wins. That's probably the ceiling as it stands.
Right. And I agree with you. I think this is going to be their true concern with D-Hop out. They're a team that doesn't really get figured out till about the second half of the season, because Kingsbury throws in a couple different kinks in the offense. Right. With this air raid style. It's unique. Many teams really don't focus on it at the beginning of the year because it's only one game, and then they start picking off people and scoring absurd numbers and putting up ridiculous offensive statistics. But when it comes to defense, they have all this versatility, but it almost feels like they keep just doing it at the same position, right? You have Zaven Collins and Isaiah Simmons. They're almost the exact same type of player, which kind of limits how they're going to utilize both of them at the same time, especially with how both of them line up at roughly the middle linebacker, outside linebacker position. Buda Baker's an absolute stud in the back end. Byron Murphy has started to be more consistent. I think you'll see something that is going to be with Trey McBride as a tight end, try and give them a double tight end set more often with Zach Ertz, because Zach Ertz is more of he's basically right now a wide receiver playing at the tight end position at this point in his career.
Yeah, and he was putting in some work for this team once he got traded. So
absolutely. And then remember, Rondale Moore, it's very elusive wide receiver. They still have plenty of weapons without
AJ Green resigned.
Right. And we got to remember Christian Kirk's gone. That's another key loss. Kirk got paid. You got to try and really maximize this team. And it really is just going to come down again to, can they outscore people? That's how it was last year. Their defense was very opportunistic last year, which was kind of how they limited teams. They were a bend but don't break type of defense. Get the occasional turnover, hold teams to field goals instead of touchdowns. That was their bread and butter. But again, when it comes down to this, it's going to come down to Kyler Murray. You're absolutely right. He has to play absolutely out of his mind this year. And don't get me wrong, his first 3 years he's played outstanding, but you see that towards the end of the year that he's gotten beaten. He got beaten up last year, even the year before that, when they had an opportunity to get themselves into the playoffs. His body hasn't been holding up. And then you see, as soon as something goes bad, it gets really bad for the Arizona Cardinals. When it rains, it pours. It's not like how they are trying to figure out and make adjustments, which has been a huge hindrance of Cliff Kingsbury in his career. Like you mentioned, awful in second halves.
And
go ahead, chime in.
My bad, bro. I didn't mean to interrupt. I just wanted to say, I feel like we're probably going to touch on this, but you know how they removed that addendum in Kyler Murray's contract? I just wanted to add my 2 cents. I feel like that was kind of an indictment on a Kyler Murray. I mean, I know he said it himself that he doesn't study film, he doesn't watch film, and he and the organization found it disrespectful that they even had to add a clause like that. And I guess what was disrespectful was the backlash and whatnot. But for me, I mean, that's why I was talking about how it all hinges on the shoulders of a Kyler Murray, because that's one of the reasons why, and you talked about this, the lack of adjustments. It's not just on Cliff Kingsbury, but it's also on Kyler Murray. Like if you was watching more film, they wouldn't have had to include that clause in your contract, just because we've never seen that before. It's unprecedented. And so that's definitely something I feel like he needs to work on, just because he does have some flaws in his game. He's not a perfect quarterback, and he's only getting better. He's gotten better every single year, because let's not forget, this team was once the worst team in football. But if he can clean up some of those mistakes, not just on the field, but off the field, that'll go a long way.
Without question. So you actually just jumped right into it. So we might as well pick it apart a little bit. I think when it comes to this, it really just, what is the motivation for Kyler Murray? Is it just to get his bag? It almost becomes a question mark of his commitment to the game, right? Mm-hmm. If he's really not studying film, he's come out and publicly said that. If they need to just get the minimum out of him, but how much is 4 hours really going to help, right? That's still like a very small margin. You may see a couple of different things that you can try and utilize during a game, but it's not enough that can really jump you from one different spectrum to the other, especially when defenses are putting in new wrinkles week in, week out.
Right.
So, and this is something that I found unique because it always comes down to what the greatest of all time puts in, right? That's like the standard. That's how you become. I've heard this from from Jeff Darlington, who works for ESPN, that Tom Brady puts in 50 hours of film. 50. And you're telling me that the greatest of all time puts in 50 hours, no questions asked. It's all a part of what he's doing for the commitment of his team. That's just a huge red flag. And that you can't even get Kyler to do 4 or even 10, a fifth of that. And you want his bag like this? I want more than anyone for everyone to get their money, right? Rightfully so. Everyone deserves their opportunity to make sure that they're financially stable for the rest of their lives. But that's a question mark. And I know we talked about this the other day when we were on Goat Talk's 2-year anniversary. If you haven't, go subscribe to Goat Talk with Marcus. We talked about this a lot, and it created some riff-raff between the panel. How can you justify it? It's just a domino effect from a bad organization having to put it in, the domino effect that the agent really didn't notify him, and the domino effect that Kyler Murray signed it, and the backlash was going to be inevitable because as soon as somebody leaked that information or saw his contract, it was going to blow up either way. And if you're a Cardinal fan, you should be alarmed. You really should be. And now it's going to create you're going to really see where his mind at is this year, especially with D-Hop out these first 6 games. It's got to play absolutely lights out for them to just be competitive this year. So it's going to be intriguing. I don't know what your thoughts are on how this addendum thing is. I agree. It's an indictment on him, but it's also something that needs to be an indictment on the franchise that this is something that they had to incorporate.
No doubt, bro. And I feel like because it's received so much publicity, because it's kind of blown up, I think this needed to happen, honestly. Like we haven't talked about this, and you probably know this, but sometimes you got to take a step backward to move forward. And I feel like this is kind of that step backward that Kyler Murray and the Cardinals are both taking. Like I said, this needed to happen. And because it did happen, because it's received the backlash and the publicity and whatnot, I think we're going to see a different Kyler Murray. I don't know about you, bro, but I've started a couple of dynasty leagues, a couple of startups in the last couple of weeks. And I found myself really taking a liking to Kyler Murray. I know contrary to everything that we've kind of been talking about, it seems like we're bashing on the Cardinals, but I'm actually going to be really high on Kyler Murray. I think he's going to have a career season. Right now, I don't have him as a top 10 quarterback. I don't know about you, but to me, he's more of a top 11, top 12-ish. And I think he has
on the outside as well.
Right. And I think you're on the money with that. But I think after this season, he's going to be a bona fide, legitimate top 10 quarterback in football.
And it's going to be really intriguing to see. We're going to really find out what they're made of right away, right? They have Kansas City, they're at Vegas, and then they host the Rams.
You're going to in the first 6 weeks? In the first 3 weeks?
They can easily open up 0-3 without question.
Damn.
Then they have Carolina, Philly, and Seattle. So there's 3 games where they can kind of make that up when D-Hop comes back. Right. But there is very legitimate. They open up 2-4 or 1-5 with D-Hop out. Man, so you're gonna learn a lot about the Arizona Cardinals this year, I believe. And I agree with you. I have them teetering around 8 or 9 wins, just in that conversation in those last couple of weeks, whether or not they'll be a potential wild card team at the end of the year.
No doubt. And if they had D-Hop, if they had him for the full season, barring injury, of course, I probably would have this team hovering more around 10, 11 wins. I think he's that good. He's still a top 5 receiver when he's on the field.
Absolutely. And you can just see how much and how important he really is to this squad.
Oh, no doubt, bro. Every quarterback needs their number 1 wide receiver. I mean, we've seen it with Dak Prescott before the arrival of an Amari Cooper. He wasn't really doing a lot, at least statistically. Right. And even on the football field, like the eye test, he just was a worse quarterback without a bona fide number 1. A lot of times these younger quarterbacks, they need that number 1. So we're going to see, how far Kyler Murray has matured, and we'll see what he does. He still, like you talked about, has an allotment of weapons. And so hopefully that's enough to hold it down for the first 6 weeks of the season.
Absolutely. Let's jump to the next team. they are the team that probably many argue if they catch a lob of a interception that should have been caught by Tart from the San Francisco 49ers, they would probably would have been the team representing the NFC in the Super Bowl. That is the San Francisco 49ers. They were, again, just on the brink. Jimmy G figures out ways to help them win games. It is no longer Jimmy G's team, however. It will be the evolution that is Trey Lance. Really intriguing to see because he hasn't started many games. He didn't have much starting experience in college. Pretty much only had a year of starts, and then he had that one exhibition game that everyone thought was completely pointless that they had in the fall because the FCS moved their season to the spring, and then FBS Division 2, moving their season to the spring. They did re-sign Deebo Samuel. He got his bag. That was something that was crucial, especially if they're going to have Trey Lance in there, especially with how Deebo is Mr. Do-It-All in special teams, the running game, catching. He's just an all-around player that is going to help them. Brandon Ayuk, Jawan Jennings, another solid trio of wide receivers that showcased their stride, especially towards the end of last year with Garoppolo. The real issue is going to be what they're going to have on the defensive end in the secondary. That it was been their issue for a long time, but they did try to sign Charvarius Ward. I don't think that's much of an upgrade, though, because of how sometimes he's the one that was getting picked on in Kansas City for numerous times on end. What are we going to expect from San Francisco? It's going to be really intriguing, especially if Jimmy G doesn't get traded, how that dynamic works, because the team is completely rallies around Garoppolo.
Right. And I think that's definitely, an important aspect that people are missing out on. A lot of people, they attack and they flame Jimmy G and they talk about how he's, the one that kind of holds his team back. And I definitely agree to a certain extent, especially as it pertains to being able to win a Super Bowl, which obviously is the ultimate goal. But in a lot of ways, like you talked about, this team gravitates towards Jimmy G. This team loves Jimmy G. The locker room loves Jimmy G. The coaching staff loves Jimmy G. He's well respected. He's well liked, even if at times, his game isn't nearly as liked, right? But I think with the Trey Lance, he's going to add so much more explosion. He's so much more dynamic than a Jimmy G. Now, as a passer, I don't know what to expect, at all. I know we just talked about, young quarterbacks and how they need a bona fide number one. He has that. He actually has multiple number one options. George Kittle, Deebo Samuel, Brandon Ayuk has looked like a number one option in the past. Even if that really only became because of opportunity and a whole bunch of injuries around him. So he has a lot to work with. He has a top tier offensive line. He has the best offensive line in football in Trent Williams. He has a defense that, while you talked about, the weaknesses in the secondary, this is still arguably a top 10 defense in football. You have one of the best linebackers in football under Fred Warner. You still have, that defensive line, Eric Armstead, and those boys up there. And so I definitely expect this team in the playoffs, but again, a lot like how I talked about how a lot hinges on the shoulders of a Kyler Murray, a lot's going to come down to the shoulders of a Trey Lance, literally his shoulders, and his throwing, what he's going to be able to do in the passing game. He's going to add a different element. They're going to be a lot more dynamic. They're going to be a lot more explosive. But if he's going to be turning the football over, if he's not going to be accurate, or if he's going to be a liability in the pass game, then this team's ceiling isn't very high. But like I said, they have everything literally around him. They have the coaching staff, they have the scheme, the style, they have everything around you. And so if he's not, and I wouldn't even blame him if he's not up to the job, because this is his first full year starting, but a lot's going to come down to him, and there's going to be a whole lot of pressure on him. So we'll see what happens. But whether or not he is able to elevate this team offensively, I still see this team competing for a spot in the playoffs.
Without question. And this really does remind me of the whole Kaepernick, Alex Smith situation, right? Mm-hmm. Alex Smith had the keys for the car for a while. He got hurt. Kaepernick was finally given the keys, and he took the car and ran with it. A little bit different now with how Garoppolo was the one that's still putting them in winning situations, but it's still reminiscent of that, it feels like. You're trying to get rid of the veteran who the team galvanizes towards, to go with a young, purebred who gives you a completely different dimension of skills with his athleticism, like you said, his ability to run the ball, and the ability of a strong arm that is lights out from what I've seen in his, especially in his combine videos as well as in his limited playing time. Again, like you said, and their linebacking core is absolute monstrous. Warner, Greenlaw, Al-Shahir, they arguably have the best linebacking core in football. You could easily make that argument and there will be no debate about it.
Right.
Again, like you said, the issue will be the secondary. If they can hold down the fort, if their front seven usually covers up and masks a lot of their secondary problems. But they do have a quite favorable schedule. If you ask me, they should easily be in the 10, potentially 11 win range, if I'm being honest, especially towards the end of the season where they get Seattle, the Commanders. They have lulls in their schedule where they could easily rally off 3 or 4 wins with Trey Lance at the helm. And it's going to be all about how capable he is as a passer. I think that's what it's going to be. It's going to be somewhat reminiscent of what Shanahan was doing with how he was in Washington, right? He had young quarterbacks in RG3 and Kirk Cousins. You let the running backs and skill players get the ball. You let them settle into games. You roll them out. And that's what Shanahan does. He's one of the brightest offensive minds in football. Don't be surprised if he's going to make sure that Lance is set up for success to ensure the capability of this team. But I do want to ask you this one question about San Fran. Would you, if you were the GM, are you putting Garoppolo back there or are you putting Trey Lance back there?
I think what they're doing right now is they're right. I'm standing by my commitment to Trey Lance. You know, look, we love Jimmy G. We know that we're capable of going to a Super Bowl with Jimmy G, but we don't know if we're capable of winning a Super Bowl. Or I mean, we know that we're not capable of winning a Super Bowl with Jimmy G. And like I said, just like that added element, being more explosive, being more dynamic. He might have his flaws as a passer, but he does have a bigger arm than Jimmy Garoppolo. So he could push the ball down the field a lot further, you know, than Jimmy Garoppolo. So that's another element that he brings to the table. But yeah, no, just to answer your question, I think what the front office is doing is the right thing. You know, just because we know that we have a team that's capable of advancing to the Super Bowl, but we want to see if what Trey Lance brings to the table, if that's enough to really push his team over the top. And I know Jimmy Garoppolo, he hasn't been the model of health. And so that's another thing that I think a lot of people don't consider. And so, yeah, I think what they're doing is the right thing.
I agree. I think the injury bug was the more important issue for me. And you do have Lance on a rookie deal, and you got to maximize what you have when you have these opportunities with a young quarterback as well. Then my caveat would be then to you, where should Garoppolo go? Where would you send him? I would send him to Cleveland. That's what I would do.
See, I don't know. I mean, because when you signed Jacoby Brissett, you told him that he was going to be the starter. You know, and he's been taking all the reps during training camp. He's the one who's been establishing that chemistry with Amari Cooper, Donovan Peoples-Jones, David Bell, David Njoku, and those boys. And I think with training camp having already been, you know, in full swing these last couple of weeks, I just don't know if that would send the right message. I think it's a great team, or it's a great answer. I think the Cleveland Browns definitely on its surface, but I think because of the commitment that they made to Jacoby Brissett, I think he'd have to be terrible in training camp for them to pivot towards a Jimmy Garoppolo. I mean, right now, as things stand, I know he's not officially suspended, but if the NFL, if they were to lose that appeal, Deshaun would only really miss 6 games. Maybe they extend it to 7 games, maybe 8 games, maybe at the very most 9-10 games. But you know that he's going to be back if they're able to hold it down come playoff time, or at least he'll be able to take this team to the playoffs because we know he'll be there for the final stretch. And so with the Jimmy Garoppolo, I just don't know if he'd be fine with backing up with Deshaun Watson, you know, in the closing stretch of the year. It's really hard to pick a team, bro. Like, I don't want to say Seattle. I dropped the shorts before I went on vacation, a shorts episode, and I talked about how it just doesn't make sense. You know, I know he's capable of taking a team to the Super Bowl when all the pieces around him are right, but I think if Seattle were to trade for him, that's a win now move. Seattle isn't in win now position, and it's not even a guarantee that Jimmy Garoppolo would take this team to the playoffs. And so essentially he'd be a 1-year rental, and you're giving up a second round pick because it's an intra-division trade. San Fran would definitely look to acquire more capital than they would, you know, expect in dealing with other teams. And so for Seattle, that doesn't make sense. Cleveland, I just laid out why I don't think that should happen. I think honestly, bro, we're gonna have to wait for an injury or two, and I hate talking about or having to talk about, oh, we gotta wait for injuries or whatnot, because
Right.
obviously none of us want to see anybody get injured. But as we all know, at the same time, though, on the same token, it's a part of the game. Injuries are kind of inevitable. And so I think right now, San Fran, they do smart to kind of just hold off, just let them know, like, yo, there's not a lot of teams right now that are in need for a quarterback like you. So, just wait it out, stick it out. And hopefully by the end of the preseason, we'll have a situation, figured out for you. But for the time being, you got to hold off until there's an injury, because I don't see any teams out there really giving up, capital to acquire Jimmy Garoppolo.
Right. So you think he might be? Do you think he's in San Francisco the whole year, though? You think?
No, not the whole year, because like I said, injuries are inevitable, and so I think they're just gonna have to let him know, like, yo, if you don't mind just sticking around until, I guess, a team, has an injury at quarterback. Now it's not like that, obviously, but I think the verbatim of the language is somewhat similar. But I think that's what it's really gonna come down to.
That's intriguing, because I feel like if Deshaun gets the year, I think Cleveland and Seattle are really the only two options at this point. I think you would agree with that.
Right. And sorry, just to add on, okay, if Deshaun does get the full year, like if that's stamped, then Cleveland does make more sense.
Right.
Especially if Jacoby Brissett struggles, the first couple weeks of the season, they start off 1-2, 0-3. Then it's like, oh shoot, Deshaun's gone the whole season. Jimmy Garoppolo will be a 1-year rental, and we'll see what happens.
Absolutely. All right, now let's go to the team that inside and out, which is the Seattle Seahawks. Mm-hmm. This is the first time in a decade there is no guy named Russell Wilson taking the snaps. He was traded to Denver in almost like, it feels like a rebuild move. Bobby Wagner is now gone as well, going to arch rivals in the Rams. So it's an open competition between Geno and Drew Lock. DK Metcalf did get his money, as like how I said on Go Talk, that as almost, it felt like a move to make sure that fans are still filling the seats, even though it is the 12th man, and Seattle pretty much has the Seahawks and the Seattle Sounders, and they always show up and show out for their teams up in the state of Washington. The defense, a major issue last year, as they allowed the 31st most yards per game. Going to be really intriguing to see. The team is extremely young. They have a lot of young talent, but it's going to be hard to see how this rebuild unfolds. I was extremely surprised that Pete Carroll said, let's still go. I thought he was not going to want to be coaching in a rebuild. You'll probably have a little bit more information than I do. Talk to me about your Seahawks. You've been at camp also these last couple of days. What have you seen?
I've been seeing a lot of uncertainty at quarterback. I haven't been very, I guess, let's just say, pleased with what's, going down there at quarterback. I don't think I've seen the best of Geno Smith. I don't think I've seen the best of Drew Lock. I've seen these guys throw picks. I've seen these guys, I guess, relatively struggle. And so it's going to be a tough year. I just, if you ask me, I think Drew Lock should be the starter, just because I think he caters more to Seattle's personnel, especially at wide receiver. You talk about the strengths of a Drew Lock. It's his arm. It's his athleticism. Right. And it's his ability to kind of extend a play, not like Russ, but he's athletic over there. He had 6 rushing touchdowns his last season at Mizzou, but like I talked about, he has a rocket of an arm. And what's the best part about the passing game? The deep passing game. Because when Pete Carroll and the Seattle Seahawks offense isn't running the football, they're throwing it deep. And so if you want to be able to instill or install that aspect of what you want offensively, Drew Lock got to be the guy, right? I mean, it's almost like by default. I understand Geno Smith right now has the edge, as Pete Carroll has referred to, but that's because, look, he's been in the system. He's backed up Russell Wilson these last 3 years, but I think he has more career picks than touchdowns. He's 30+ years old. I just don't know what the ceiling is with him. You know what I mean? We got to see him last season for 3 games, 3.5, if you include that one against the Rams in which Russell Wilson got injured. There were some encouraging things, but there were a lot more unencouraging things. And I just I don't see how fans can expect a lot more, just because we've seen him for over a decade now in the league. And so I just don't see him coming in and just exploding on the scene and putting up crazy numbers, leading this team to the playoffs. I don't see that happening. Now, I don't have the utmost of confidence in a Drew Lock, but like I said, I think he just caters more to what Seattle brings. at least as far as talent and what they want to do offensively. Defensively, yeah, you talked about it, bro. Like, it was bad. And if I'm not mistaken, Seattle's defense actually spent the most time on the field last year, and it was 35 plus minutes. So they
Right.
were spending that much time on the field, and the offense was barely spending over 20. That's a problem, and that has been a problem these last couple of years. Seattle just always seems to be one of those teams that are drifting in the 30s, 31s, 32s as far as, time of possession, and that's gonna have to change. And I think one of the things that has to change, if that's gonna change, is third down, because third down, Seattle has just been horrific. I think last season they converted, what was it, just 32%? And
Yeah.
I don't know. There's a lot of issues. There's a lot of issues. At running back, I like what Seattle has at running back. I mean, Rashad Penny, we saw what he did the last 5 weeks of the season last year. Ken Walker, arguably the best running back in all of college football. I think Seattle definitely has a strength there. Both guys just have to stay healthy because Chris Carson, like we all saw, was forced to medically retire. I
Right.
think offensively it's definitely gonna be a struggle because if Seattle, they're gonna be falling behind in games, it's gonna be hard to run the football. So a lot is going to come down to Drew Lock. The weaponry obviously is still there. DK, Tyler Lockett, they've been doing their thing over in training camp. The offensive line, I think is going to be much improved. Obviously, it's been much maligned these last 10 years, when Russell Wilson was there. But I think now more than ever, there's a lot of potential. There's a lot of youth. There's a lot of versatility. And there's a lot to work with. I like what I've been seeing from the guys. And defensively, a lot of young pieces. I think Seattle, they didn't draft a linebacker because they like what they're potentially going to get out of a Cody Barton. Jordan Brooks was second in the league in tackles in his first full season as a starter. You know what I mean? So I think there's a lot of potential there. I think Seattle has arguably the best safety duo in football. Now, Jamal Adams is dealing with, I think, what was it, broken fingers? And so he's going to be playing with the cast on.
The man is always hurt. He's always hurt.
But that also speaks to his play style, because he's so, downhill, he's so aggressive, he's so forceful, he's so powerful. There's a lot of contact, a lot of aggression when he plays. And so you're right. But I guess his play does come at a cost. But hopefully that's not going to hinder him too much. And then the defensive line, I mean, oh my goodness, I think there's a lot to work with there. Definitely a lot of pieces. You have Poona Ford, you had Shelby Harris in that trade. You drafted Aboye Mafe, you have Adero Taylor, you bring in an Achino Owosu. I think the pass rush is going to be solid. And I think that's pretty much.
And you're making the move to a 3-4 as well.
Right. And so there's going to be a lot more blitzing. There's going to be a lot less zone coverage. There's going to be more man coverage. I think the corner situation is definitely something to monitor. I mean, you bring in a Justin Coleman. He spent time in the system. You bring in an Artie Burns, who coached or who played under Sean Desai, who's the new associate head coach what's his other role? Passing game coordinator, I think, or one of the assistant head coach, something like that. But yeah, the corner situation is definitely one to monitor, as is the quarterback situation. But I think this team is going to be a lot better than people think. I'm hearing people say that, Seattle's going to be in contention for the number 1 overall pick. I wouldn't go there, and I think if the over-under.
I have that being Atlanta and Chicago.
Exactly. And I think Atlanta's going to finish with the worst record in football right now, at least right now as things stand. And I think Seattle, they're just going to be feisty, bro. I think they're going to be a team that not everybody wants to play. I think they're going to pull off a couple of wins that a lot of people don't see. I mean, and I stay bringing this up, but a couple of years ago, remember when the Miami Dolphins went 5-11? But when they started the year off 0-6, and that team was getting blown out left and right. They were losing games 40-3, 50-7. And that team was talent deficient to its core, arguably the least talented team in football, but sometimes it's not always the more talented team that wins. And this, it's any given Sunday. And I think Seattle, they're going to be fiery. They're going to be feisty. And Pete Carroll's still the coach. He's still one heck of a coach. And so, sorry, that was a lot, but I think Seattle,
let it out.
This team is going to be a lot better than people realize. And if they can get anything out of that quarterback room, then who knows, maybe a 7th seed. I think at the very best is the ceiling for this football team.
Wow.
Only if quarterback play is average. And obviously the chances of that happening are slim. But
I agree with you on the Drew Lock situation. He should be the quarterback, especially with Lockett and Metcalf, 2 guys that are very good deep ball wide receivers. Mm-hmm. And that's Drew Lock's bread and butter is his deep ball.
Exactly.
He does have accuracy deficiencies from 15 yards in,
right?
But his deep ball is arguably one of the best. I wouldn't say one of the best in football, but it's up there in contention with because he's got one of the better arms, talents in football. And with Geno, many thought it was going to be his mind of reading defenses of why he would succeed. And it's been his mind and reading defenses of why he's always struggled. So his strength that he had in college has become his deficiency in the NFL, which is something that is never a good sign when you have a veteran quarterback competing for a job. But I think you have there's plenty of upside. It's going to be a lot of a learning curve. I have Seattle around 5 or 6 wins. Like you said, I think they're going to win a couple of home games because of the 12th man. The crowd matters. It really does. And people think that stadiums and the fans really don't make an impact. If you watch some of these football games, the home crowd matters depending on turnout and all that. So, it's a rallying cry. And the team will show up. They play hard. I think that's what's going to be very reminiscent, like you said, of that Miami team. That there may be games that get really, really bad. But then there's going to be some games that just their flat-out effort will win the day. So that being said, Steezy, I'm going to give you my records for each team, my win count, and then you give me yours, all right? I've got the Rams at 12, finishing as the 2nd seed in the NFC, because I do think that they will rest Matt Stafford a couple games this year, and he won't play the full 17. I have San Francisco finishing with 10. Then I have Arizona at 8. Then I have Seattle at 5. Let me see what you got there with your win counts for the NFC West.
Okay, for the Rams, I'm going to agree with you. I see 12 wins. So 12-5.
Right.
I think for the Niners, I don't want it. This is tough. The Niners. I'm gonna go on a limb. I'm gonna say 11-6.
All right.
I think they go 11-6. I think the Arizona Cardinals, I think they go 9-8.
Okay.
And the Seahawks, I say 7-10.
Wow, there we go. I love
that might be a little optimistic. I want to be a little optimistic, but hey, it's August.
It's August. There's plenty of time to change that pick. So
right. Maybe a couple more training camps, and I'll be like, you know what? Maybe
that takes off a win. That takes off a win.
Right. Maybe 6-11.
I'm just messing with you, Steezy, but thank you so much for coming on the show, my man. Always a pleasure to have you on. Plug yourself, man. What's going on next, and where can they catch you? Go subscribe to this man, all right? He's got great content.
Thank you so much, bro. For me, I've been in vacation mode for way too long. I said this on the show on the Go Talk podcast with Marcus the other day. And like he talked about, please be sure to subscribe. We're trying to get our man to 150 subscribers on YouTube. So once again, Go Talk podcast with Marcus. If you're not already tuned in, that man be putting in work. But for me, honestly, what's next, bro, on my channel? I'm gonna be coming out with a whole bunch of shorts. I feel like something I want to do every single day. That's not gonna be my main source of content, obviously, on the channel. Right. But the next rookie that I'm breaking down, because I have been breaking down a bunch of Seahawks rookies, is Kobe Bryant, and whether or not he's bringing the Mamba mentality to Seattle. That should be dropping hopefully come Monday on my YouTube channel at Steezy A. Smith. But before you even check that out, as I like to always do, you got to check out my man's first Final Whistle podcast on all platforms, whether that's YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, whatever, any platform. Be sure to check out my man. He's been putting in work as well. Covers a variety of sports. He's very versatile. He knows what he's talking about. He knows what he's doing. Be sure to do that. And once you go do that, then you can find me at Steezy A. Smith. I don't just talk about the Seahawks. I also cover the NBA when I can. I cover other teams in the NFL when I can. And there's gonna be a lot of good boxing fights coming up as well. So those are definitely some things that I want to cover. But yeah, if any of that sounds interesting, then be sure to give us a follow and a subscribe. And thanks all for tuning in.
Absolutely. I appreciate the love as always. Looking forward to have you on again soon.
Yes, sir.
But everyone, this was another edition of the Final Whistle Sports Podcast. You guys know where to find me on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, Anchor, you name it. We're pretty much on it. Please hit that subscribe button. Please give a review. Please go subscribe and follow my man Steezy A. Smith with his content. But everyone, enjoy your weekends, enjoy the rest of your days. Whenever you're going to be listening or watching this show, enjoy it, and God bless. This was another edition of the Final Whistle Sports Podcast.